Peace, love, and Reiki. Rachel Goldberg here with Phyllis Furumoto, whose computer and audio are all working together now. Thank you all for your patience. Those of you who are with us live, please type into your chat and let us know that you can hear us. While we can hear each other, what we care about most is that you can hear us too. So welcome to this episode of Global Reiki Webinars with myself. I'm Rachel Goldberg, and Usui Shiki Ryoho, Grandmaster and Lineage Bearer Phyllis Furumoto. Tonight we are talking about the topic of lineage and Phyllis is going to answer for us the question of what is lineage. And we're also going to be going through questions that came in from many of you from our global community in advance. We've got right now, I saw in the chat earlier while you were being so kind and patient while we got our technology working, we've got people in Washington State, Minnesota, New York, Almaty, Kazakhstan, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Phyllis is in Japan. I'm in Chicago. We've got people from Israel, Uruguay, New Hampshire, Michigan, Normal, Illinois, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Colorado, Jerusalem, Buenos Aires, so Brisbane, Argentina. Oh, it's when the wonderful thing of being on, having the chat on so long before we actually start is there are so many of your greetings here. So it can be obvious to anyone who is new to Global Reiki Webinars that we really are a global community. There are people practicing Reiki all over the planet. And these webinars or YouTube videos, if you're watching the replay, there are an opportunity for you to connect with those of us who are part of your community practicing Reiki all over the world. So another way that you can connect with the Global Reiki community that engages in these webinars is in our private Facebook forum. If you just go on Facebook and search Global Reiki Webinars, again, just Global Reiki Webinars, it's a private Facebook group, and you'll just answer a couple questions and get admitted to the group where you can ask questions, respond to anything that came up for you while you were watching this webinar or any of the other webinars that we have done in the past or in the future, and engage with serious practitioners or brand new practitioners or, you know, unsure practitioners. Wherever you are on your journey, we're all together in community and engaging in these conversations, which is really, really cool. So the other thing is Phyllis and I started this as a project of the heart, and it's something that has been supported by community, and we hope will continue to be supported by community. So later in this webinar, or if you're watching on YouTube, down in the description link, down in the description of this video, there's a link that you can click to send a donation to our PayPal account, which is just reikiwebinars@gmail.com. Your monetary gifts help us to pay for our softwares and any upgrades or new additions that we do to make these recordings more accessible to people like you all over the world, and also to support us in continuing to offer these experiences. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis to lead us in some Reiki and then her talk on lineage.
Hello, everyone. I have been in Japan for about 3 days, and it's really exciting for me. I'll be here for 3 months. And the really wonderful thing when we planned this webinar was that I was going to be in Japan, and I can speak to you now from here about lineage. And this is a great topic for me here in Japan. So before we get in to the nitty gritty, let's share Reiki. Thank you. As I feel the Reiki going through my body and connecting with each of you, experiencing that time and space is but an illusion, that we can really be here with each other. But I see behind me and around me my ancestors, from whom I received genetic traces of characteristics that I live today. From whom I receive spiritual genetics, traces of which I live today. And I hold and carry emotional conditioning, ideas, and sometimes trauma, which enriches my life today. Thank you. Well, that was an amazing experience for me. I didn't know what would happen, but when I closed my eyes, I could just feel the presence of all these people around me and realizing that when you're surrounded by people who are in some way, well, this is my experience now, genetically my ancestors, my lineage, I see myself in a context that's really different from the context that I grew up in. For instance, in Iowa, which is in the middle of the United States, and everyone else around me had a totally different genetic inheritance, except for my family. So my lineage felt very far in the distance. And when there was a kind of interest in lineage that came up, at first, in my memory, it was from a lot of my African American friends. I'm sorry if that's politically non-correct, who decided to go back to Africa and to live or at least visit for a month or two in Africa where they came from. And it was a life-changing experience for them. And now, in the last few years, since I've been traveling to Japan, I realize I'm having the same experience of having just a different context of my life. And it's really amazing. And it's why a lot of times people congregate in communities where we share a lot of same values, foundation principles of living, and so on. And here in Japan, it's a very interesting dynamic because there's a Japanese sort of modern spiritual movement was started around the same time as Reiki, called Tenrikyo. And there's a city called Tenri here, and there are millions of people who practice the same practice living in the city. And I find this really interesting. And there's a part of me that sees this movement in the Reiki community to find community, to be able to seek out people who have the same values and principles and the same way of living. And I feel like in the last few years that's been a shift in our focus. And sometimes our conversations here on Global Reiki webinars leads me to believe that we are just searching for a way to be a community, but not live in the same place. So this is a great creative endeavor. And I'm really excited about today's webinar and also about your questions. I mean, I have to say that I forgot that we had these two webinars so closely scheduled. I don't know how this happened, but I did know that I was really drawn to do a webinar on lineage while I was here. And so this morning I woke up and no email from Rachel. And I'm going, oh, maybe I have the wrong day. Maybe I have the wrong hour. Maybe I missed it because our time difference is so big. I'm now, let's see. I'm now on Tuesday, I believe, at 9 o'clock in the morning, or 9:26, they say. And I am really loving being here with you and feeling this globe, somehow the representation of our global community in the chat today. In the writing that we put out for this webinar, I wanted to just reiterate that and kind of go deeper into that, and then we'll dive right into the questions because there's a lot of them and there are some really thought-provoking ones. Okay, So as we, maybe some of you aren't interested in your ancestry at all. Some of you feel like it's so complicated that you don't want to deal with it, and you can't. And that's one of the really interesting parts of our society today, is that we live in a world that is constantly becoming more and more homogenized. We are intermarrying in different cultures and different language groups and so on, so that our genetic pool is actually becoming much, in my opinion, much more human and less, well, you're Japanese and you're Russian and you're Swedish and you're Australian and so on. It's a very, very different genetic pool that we're making. And we're creating a kind of wonderful human, there would be a lineage bearer, and that would have been handed down through these generations. And then everybody who was initiated in Reiki could trace their lineage back to me. And then we'd all be, we wouldn't have any of these questions. But that didn't happen. And there were many people in the Reiki community in the 1980s who thought that I wasn't doing my job because I wasn't controlling people and I wasn't keeping people from initiating masters, for instance. And I just realized in that moment it wasn't my job to control. And the one thing that I didn't want to do is become a policeman. So that was it for me. And I've avoided that, hopefully, ever since. So my next strategy then was to say, what now do we do? How do we work with lineage? So I just saw that the 22 masters that Hawayo Takata initiated went out in kind of, there's a wonderful word for it, but I can't remember it right now, but out in the world to take Reiki with them. And Wanya went to Scandinavia, and Beth Gray went to Australia, and so on. And their personalities, the way that they taught Reiki and so on, totally influenced how Reiki was seen and accepted and practiced in those areas. And now, and in the time in the late 1980s and early 1990s, many of these masters had initiated masters. And the second generation of masters from Hawayo Takata really started to shift and sometimes change the system. So instead of, for instance, a certain number of initiations, and for first degree, it became one. Or instead of teaching over a period of time, everything was taught in one weekend, and so on. And one of the changes that happened was that people didn't understand, why do we have a lineage bearer? What do we need her for? And at that point in the 1980s, I was pretty out there. I had a lot of my own healing process going, and well, sort of fortunately and unfortunately, my healing process wasn't physical. It was personality oriented. So my belief systems, how I thought about myself, and how I related with other people, those were the things that I needed to heal. I realized that I was just enraged by my upbringing and by a lot of things that I learned about who I was, and I needed to heal that, but it took years, and I'm still, having to be conscious of that. But at least now I feel like I have choice, and that's really important for me. But in the meantime, people saw this person who had very little understanding of who she was. And she was supposed to be like the lineage bearer. So how do you hold the respect for somebody who's doing some really crazy things? And most of you didn't know Reiki back in the 1980s. So you missed that part. And maybe it's a good thing. But because of that, you know, we have all these different lineages now in the world. And I feel like the questions that were asked today, for the most part, I really don't have a real answer for you, because we're all living an experience. And that experience is about how do we honor different parts of ourselves. You know, I'm really on some level lucky as a human being, I guess, that I'm 100% Japanese. And this was really fun. In the last July, my next brother down decided to do Ancestry.com research on our family. And he found out that all of our ancestors and our DNA or whatever they do are 100% Asian and Japanese. And that was kind of a relief for me because you never know. But at the same time, it was kind of disappointing because, you know, my friends say, oh, I'm, you know, half Scottish and then I'm Romanian and Russian on the other side. And it just feels so exciting. And when you see in Hawaii, the people who have intermarried in Hawaii and the kind of cultural beauty that comes out of those relationships, it's pretty amazing. So when we speak about a common ancestor, then what really ties us together as human beings? And really I'm fascinated by this whole line of thought that allows us to go back to like one woman, or, you know, in Africa or something, and she was all of our common mother. And it means for me that Reiki can become not a spiritual practice for one culture or one language group or one group of people that is educated or whatever, but that Reiki is really helping our human evolution by giving us something that's totally able to meet all of our different needs and to actually forward the process of this evolutionary step that we're taking as human beings. So the question then is, well, what about my Reiki lineage and how important is it? Well, one of the things that's you can see in other spiritual practices, that a spiritual lineage also comes with teaching. So the lineage bearer or head of the spiritual of a spiritual school holds the teaching for the next generation, and actually for generations to come. And the understanding of that is that as you teach and you initiate students, and these students become dedicated practitioners of the teaching that you have, then the next generation will receive that as closely as possible to the one that was before you. And this is where a lot of our questions come from, because culturally, in America, for instance, our priority is to create new things, you know, create new technology, create. So, you know, and as Reiki came through the United States, in some way to the rest of the world, what happened in the United States was that masters began to make Reiki their own and created new practices. But they didn't stop there. They kept recreating and recreating their practice. So now, one of the interesting questions about lineage is, can lineage and a teaching be put together? Can we identify a teaching because of the lineage? And can we identify a lineage because of the teaching? And in the old days, we used to be able to do that. And in the new days, we can't. So it brings up all these questions about importance and significance and who do we go to if we want wisdom about our practice? So these are great questions, and so we're going to head right into them because there's a long list of them too. So I hope we get to the end, because what happens in your questions, and you guys always blow my mind in your questions. Wow, I mean, when I write them down, I have to process them, and I start answering them and going through my file folders to see in my head, how am I going to respond to this question? So there's a lot of questions about lineage and multiple lineages, and then we get into lineage bearer. So I hope we get to that place today. And if not, the rest of the questions will be on our Facebook page, and also the ones from last time, because there were several different ones, and I didn't get a chance yet to do anything about those. So stay tuned. Rachel?
I forgot to unmute myself. So our first set of questions came from, I believe it's Aurelian. Do you have a different pronunciation for this person's name, Phyllis?
No.
Aurelian?
No, and she asked a lot of questions. I remember.
Yeah. So there are actually 4 questions, and I'm going to read them one at a time.
Okay.
So Aurelian's first question was, why is it important to have a valid lineage behind you?
Wow. See, what did I say? So because we are investigating this phenomena of lineage and its relevance in our world today, I have to say that I can only use my own personal understanding of lineage and why it's important to me. And you may have a very, you meaning you out there listening, may have a really different viewpoint on this. So this is a great place to have a conversation on our Facebook page. There are no right answers here. So that's my disclaimer. When I was growing up in Iowa, where there were lots of people, but none of my particular ethnicity, I felt like lineage and my relatives didn't matter. You know, that there was because I didn't know them, I didn't feel like they were important. And my grandmother, Takata, would come and visit. And on some level, there was kind of an embarrassment because there was a person there that I couldn't relate to, and I didn't know how to relate to her. And my other grandmother spoke only Japanese and a kind of pidgin English from Hawaii. So I couldn't communicate with her. And, you know, now I know this was a huge loss because it was my bridge back to Japan. And that bridge didn't get crossed and wouldn't have gotten crossed unless if I had not taken up Reiki. So I think of my brothers and sisters, some of whom have not ever been to Japan and not ever had this experience. So when I think about that, and I think about the Reiki lineage that I hold and represent, my question to myself is, why is this important to people? And why is it important to me? And it is just simply said that it's because I have a context. I have somebody that I can close my eyes, and when I think of my ancestors in Reiki, I can like picture them. I have pictures of them, and they like stand behind me figuratively, and maybe sometimes whisper in my ear when I really need them. It's a place that I go that's inside of me. And because I haven't lived without a Reiki lineage, I don't know what that's like. And maybe that's okay too. I don't have a judgment about if it's good or bad or right or wrong. That's ridiculous, because I know people who are orphans who don't know their parentage at all. And I love them, and they're great people. So, we have to be able to, just be open to the experience that's coming to us and ask yourself, is this important to you? And if it is, then, you have a great research project coming your way. And I really support you in it. And there are some organizations that have a lot of experience in tracing lineage and keeping track of people's initiating masters and so on. So if you need assistance in that, just let us know, and I can put you in touch with some people. Thanks.
Thank you, Phyllis. Aurelian's next question is it important to have a longer or shorter Reiki lineage?
Well, I think it is, the length of your lineage is not important. And realistically, people today who are being initiated, their Reiki lineage can't be too short, because usually the practice comes from at least 2 generations ago. If you had a short lineage, it would mean somebody, in my viewpoint, it would mean somebody who came very close to Mikao Usui. Yeah.
Are you ready for the next question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Aurelian's next question was, in your experience, do you see differences between the lineages coming from Mrs. Takata? I refer here to the American Reiki masters and Canadian Reiki masters as well.
This is a question I don't understand. On the Canadian thing, I have only heard by hearsay this idea of the Canadian Reiki masters versus American Reiki masters, and I just have never understood this, so I can't respond to this question very well. I'm sorry. Hawayo Takata taught her masters all equally, in the sense that she taught them individually to themselves. Like if you're a master and you teach a lot, you'll see that one class that you teach has a kind of personality, and you teach to that class, and then the next class could be really different, and you teach to that class. And I saw Hawayo Takata do that all the time, individually and in classes and so on. But the basic information was the same. It was the context in which she put it in that was different, in the sense of what was brought out in her, the stories that she told, and so on. So I don't see a difference, and I don't understand making a difference, really.
And Aurelian's final question is, did Mrs. Takata pass different initiation on different lineages?
Okay, so this one, this question, I really don't understand. So I I can transpose it, and if it's not right, you write to me and tell me, and I can answer it on the Facebook page. A lot of Hawaii Takata's masters did teach, and a lot of them did initiate other masters. And when they did, some of them really were clear that they were initiating in this teaching, right? In this teaching, and that their initiation lineage was from Usui, Hayashi, Hawaii Takata, and themselves. And I was the next lineage bearer, but that had to do with the system, not with the initiation. So it might be confusing, but it's a way that many, many masters hold this practice, right now, is that they initiate into a teaching. And that's why there are many masters that initiate into this particular teaching, of which I am a part of the teaching as the spiritual lineage bearer. So I hope that that is clear, and that her teaching of initiation was the same as far as I saw. And I was present with her when she trained is really not the right word, but shared the initiation with several of her masters, Canadian and American. And what's true, and you always have to remember this because we're human and this is an oral tradition, is that what she taught was received by a person who had their own filters and their own memory and their own priority. So in the 1990s, the early 1990s, a group of us looked at, the way that we practiced, and had we taken or changed the teaching at all. And even I had added stuff to the teaching, and I realized that this was in the future going to be Reiki, and I didn't want that. So I took that part away, and now I teach as much as I can the practice that I was given. That's the important part for me. And I hope that all of you who are teaching practice what you were taught. I mean, that's all we can do, just to further our own lineage and practice together. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next, Andrea asked in the chat, are you using the word initiation as I would use attunement? I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Marie said, can you say that again? Initiate into teaching, yet use you as their lineage bearer. So I think what Phyllis is describing is that there's our lineage of initiation, but then there's also a spiritual lineage, which refers to the energetic body of the practice. Do you want to add to that, Phyllis?
Only that, yes, that's what I'm referring to. And so as we go through the questions, you'll see more and more this theme that I have of, excuse me, I think I have to sneeze, of that the lineage cannot in some way be separated from teaching, from the teaching, meaning what is being imparted as a practice. And part of this practice is to have a spiritual lineage and the function of that lineage is to hold the practice in perpetuity.
Yeah. Phyllis, is it all right if I share some thoughts that I'm feeling relevant? Okay.
Sure.
So a couple of examples of this, where your lineage of initiation or your spiritual lineage might be in a relative world different, would be like other masters who were initiated by Hawayo Takata, but still recognized after Hawayo Takata's transition, recognized Phyllis as the holder of the spiritual lineage. So people who have been initiated through that line of initiation or line of attunement would still recognize Phyllis as the lineage bearer. And it would also be similar for someone like myself, who I actually do have Phyllis Furumoto in my line of initiation. It meaning like when I was attuned, my teacher, my Reiki master gave me a piece of paper that had names that included Phyllis Furumoto, even though the form of practice that I was taught is very different than the form of practice that Phyllis holds. But there still is, for me, in my recognition, I recognize Phyllis as the holder of the spiritual practice, of the spiritual lineage and teaching, even though the way that I practice and the way that I teach, it's important to me because it's important to Phyllis to honor the teaching that I was given, even though the teaching has morphed down the line. And I'm imagining there are other people who may have that as well. And the next question that came in advance came from Dana, who said, is it right to change the attunement? I changed the word from atonement to attunement to a is it right to change the attunement to a meditation, or should it remain unchanged? I got my master and did not receive my attunement because William had a thought. I feel cheated and like it is wrong. Part of being the teacher is doing this for each new level, and I feel like they have removed a very important part. I could go with a different lineage, but you know who is too mean for me. I am now taking from
Arjava Theta.
But I love my Tian.
Yeah. So part of global Reiki webinars is to be able to translate where these questions are coming from. And I really appreciate what I feel is the anxiety behind this, because I've heard so many stories in my years of practice where people come to me and they say, you know, I learned this as Reiki, but I don't feel it as Reiki. And I always say, if it's not Reiki for you, then let it go. And I have to say that most often, the things that are being let go are not Reiki. They are added by masters who want to give everything they have to their students, or feel that their teaching is too simple and not enough, and so on. I went through that same stage myself, and way long time ago. So it's not difficult to understand. So if this practice of meditation rather than attunement does not fit you, then you do need to go to another teacher, which it sounds like you have done, and to also be able to honor how you came to Reiki, the circumstances of how you came to Reiki. And the first teaching of Reiki is extremely important. What's very important for me is not for people to discard what they did, like, well, that wasn't good enough. It was your path, and I honor your path. I totally trust it. I have to. I honor my own. And my own could have been different, but it wasn't. I don't like my path. You know, I would have loved to have had this romantic story of, you know, being in a bookstore and somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, you look really tired. Can I give you a Reiki treatment?" And that's how I was introduced to Reiki. But no, I was introduced to Reiki in a totally different way. And I had no choice about it. And I didn't like that. I still don't like it. But that's how it is. So, and it's really goofy, huh? So, you know, like I always wanted curly hair. So I'm always envious of looking at Rachel's hair. So, you know, it's important to honor our path and to know that that person who brought us to Reiki, that person who lit the fire, that person who fanned the flames, even if we didn't accept some of it, was an honored person in our lives, and that we must hold them with respect. They did the best they could. And you need to follow your path so that the Reiki that you have is 100% owned by you. Not changed, not in that sense, but owned. Like really be congruent. Thanks for the question.
The next question is from Lucy, who said, "Thank you both for this beautiful offering. I wish everyone present and in future Reiki blessings. Although I won't be in attendance, I most definitely will participate in the replay. In my particular lineage, William Rand plays a part, and it is reported that he carries many forms from various teachers. How does this affect lineage? Do I get to have you in my particular lineage, or is there a rule or guideline that says the first teacher is who carries and passes along the lineage?"
Well, William Rand has become my favorite person. You know, in the example of lineage and teaching, he was one of the first people actually who really took on teaching from many different directions, I would say, in Reiki, and accepted initiation. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk with him about what that was like for him. And if each initiation seemed like it did, you know, that it changed him somehow. I do know that his teaching is a mixture of different things. And now it's become a creation of his own. I mean, he is acknowledging that he has insight, and then he changes his practice. So his is a ever creative movement of Reiki, which is interesting. And, you know, in the beginning, I thought it was not a very honorable way to treat his masters and to hold lineage and so on. But I see now that his way of being isn't, I believe, done out of malice or out of wrongdoing kind of approach, but is following his own Reiki path. And if this is his, which I have to accept, then I also have to accept the value of it. And so I think these are great questions to ask him at some point. But I do think that and now, of course, he's not the only one. There are lots and lots of people who have multiple initiations on many different levels, whose practice is a combination of lots of different practices, and even some practices that aren't Reiki, like there are some people who really do, who are shamans as well. So they combine the shamanistic practice with Reiki, for instance. So I just see that there's a part for everyone to play. Like in the orchestra, there's always the bass that holds the ground and just, holds the heartbeat of the whole thing. And then there are often these other instruments that get to, do this little funny dance sometimes and be really playful and so on. And, it all has to come together to form the gorgeous music that we hear. And I feel like that's my own metaphor for how Reiki is today. And so it's not my job to judge. It's my job to accept it and to hear the music. And I tell you, hearing the music is not easy sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm feeling called to just differentiate a few things of, like, when we're talking about Reiki, there's Reiki, the energy, which everyone has, and there's Reiki, which is a lineage-based spiritual practice, which is passed on with teachings. And then within that, there's the practice, and there's my practice. There's the practice or your practice. Each individual has a way of being in relationship with Reiki, the energy, as it comes through. And sometimes that might look a little bit differently than the practice. But because of that, it's also part of the practice that there are these differences in individual paths as people walk with it. And I'm curious what you're thinking as I say that, Phyllis.
Well, Reiki is it's a wonderful, Reiki as a whole, however we mean it, guides us to understanding that life is a paradox. So these things like Reiki goes where it's needed. So then we teach hand positions. Well, why do we do that? It's just like total paradox. And it's because, yes, Reiki will go where it's needed, but in a human place of assessing my own need in my body and what's happening energetically in my body, it's wonderful to be able to actually experience the difference. So when I receive 4 treatments in a row, for instance, every treatment is a different experience. Like, how could that be, right? Because it's the same hand position, same everything. And it increases our capacity as humans to hold dissonance. And that's why hearing the music is sometimes so hard, because we have an expectation about what music is supposed to sound like. But sometimes it's very dissonant. And, it's our growth, it's our spiritual growth to be able to hold dissonant, or what we experience as dissonance, as well as harmony. So this whole conversation about lineage is totally paradoxical. Like, of course, on some level, it doesn't matter at all. Like anybody could initiate anybody. And often people do. There's so many stories about people being initiated, going to a music festival or something, and somebody coming up to them and saying, "Oh, I see in your aura that you're ready for an initiation. Would you like one?" "Oh, yeah, that'd be great." So they have a Reiki initiation. They go home and they go, "Well, like, okay, what happened there?" But now I'm practicing Reiki, right? And so that's totally effective. Like, I know some people who that's how they started Reiki, and they have no idea this person's name. I mean, they wouldn't be able to even identify them if they, passed them on the street. But they got in contact with Reiki, and it started a whole journey for them. Well, how can I say that's bad? I can't. It's just, so it's very interesting. And at the same time, I really hold this position that I carry and that I'm recognized for as being real. And I can, it's taken me years, but I can hold both of those equally now. And it's really fun.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question that was submitted in advance was from Shannon. And Shannon wrote, how does one explain the importance of lineage when a student uses more than one master?
When I think about different lineages, I have to think about having multiple parents. A lot of kids today have multiple parents. They have 3 mothers because their father got married 3 times. And so they have these influences of these 3 families behind them. And I think that, again, William Rand just puts it all out on a piece of paper, and that's how it is. And we don't really know what the influence is. So I would say that, you just be truthful as much as possible. And, what's important for me, again, is to be able to say to the person, and the practice that I'm teaching you is basically from this teacher. So they have some they have somewhere to go relative-wise. And if you can't say that, just say this is a combination of my own experience in Reiki and all of the teachers that I visited over the years. So it's just about being upfront with the people that you're with. And hopefully as a student, you'll be able to ask the teachers that you have, the masters that you have, where does this come from? Where does this teaching arise from? How did you learn that? Oh, like that.
I actually have a grandfather who was married 5 times. My biological grandmother is his first wife, and the grandmother that he was married with throughout my life, while they were both still in body, was his 5th. And I'm named after, my middle name, Dorit, I'm named after his 3rd wife, who I never met. And I've been spending my life really thinking about what this is. And you're helping me connect it to my Reiki life too. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Great.
The next question was from Rebecca, who said, do you feel some lineages are watering down the Reiki?
It's a difficult question because there are some, I can't, the first difficulty is, what is a lineage today? So if you can trace your lineage back in the initiations, like who initiated who as a master, all the way back to Mikao Usui, you're really lucky because not very many people can do that these days. And not because it's there are so many masters in between, and people forget names, and they remember names in a different way. Like there is, I read this chat just briefly about this fictitious, I believe, master called Claudia Hoffman, who for me doesn't exist. I mean, I didn't initiate a Claudia Hoffman, but I definitely initiated a German woman named Claudia Holhuth. And her name is extremely difficult to spell and to remember. And you can imagine that somebody meeting her for, 4 days and then never seeing her again, Claudia Hoffman seems like a good anglicized way to remember her name, but I believe that they're one and the same person, that Claudia Hoffman doesn't exist. Well, I'm sure there is a Claudia Hoffman somewhere, but she's not a master that I initiated. So I think what's really important is to practice, because, you know, what's true is that once you have the connection to Reiki, once you have first degree, and I believe once you really feel connected to the energy, then it's your practice that's going to determine whether or not for you Reiki is a valid practice for yourself, for your family, and in the strength of the universe. So I'm not responsible for the practice of my students. I can only hope to inspire them and to guide them, but I'm not responsible. I'm not going to say, well, you know, you're a bad person if you don't practice every day, because you're not. Yeah. And when it comes to Reiki, the energy, there ain't no watering down Reiki, the energy. It's here and it's strong. Yeah.
It's beautiful. On your camera is capturing the light, the rays of light.
Yeah,
so in front of your face, there's light coming down. The next question that came in advance was from Cheryl, who said, I have 2 lineages from 2 different masters, which I gained my masters with. The question is, do I give my students both or just one?
Well, I would say, again, that you give them both and you share what you carry from each one, so that people really have had the information. Now, whether they retain it, I don't know. But I think it's important to honor each of the teachers that you've had and understand what their contribution was to your life. Yeah.
The next question is from Eris, and Eris wrote, I trust our lineage so completely. This is based on my experience of receiving master initiation from Paul Mitchell. I think that you, Phyllis, have done a wonderful job of bringing many practitioners together in Reiki home. Can you help me understand how to avoid rigidity? This is where my question is coming from. In the Reiki circles at my home, I have met people who have training and found that some actually do not seem to have Reiki. With others, their training is quite different. I meet people who say, oh, I know Reiki, I'm not into it because, many interesting and unusual stories. I wish I could tell them that the things that they describe to me are not in my training and experience of Reiki. I want to be able to respect all healers, but acknowledge the preciousness and the value of our lineage and traditions.
Well, as I said, Eris, earlier, this is about being able to hold both equally. So as long as you hold that this is your practice and that you maintain this practice with your own integrity and your own practice, then you're honoring that. But to take that practice and become a missionary for that practice is not honoring it. It's using it as a weapon against someone who has a different practice. And so the practice that we've all adopted is this practice of needing to really hold both of these as equal, and that's a huge challenge, and it's a very good one. And it sounds like you're doing pretty well with it. And it's important to just listen and allow people to talk. And they will, if they need more from you, they'll ask. So just listen for the questions.
The next question is from Anita. Anita wrote, I have found some Reiki masters will charge more for attendees to their seminars or Reiki share days who come from lineages other than the masters. If we are all initiated practitioners, should the particular lineage make any difference in terms of costs or expenses? Is there any spiritual reality or depth to anyone's lineage apart from the spiritual maturity of the individual? I love these webinars. I am so isolated as a Reiki practitioner. It is such a, I believe, blessing to be able to take part virtually. Thank you so much for your work.
Okay, tough questions. So first of all, the part about money is about the practice. So as in the practice that I hold and teach, the part about people coming to this practice is about being able to have held a financial commitment at a certain level. So, for instance, if there's a student that comes to me from inner practice and they want to shift practices to my practice after, a fairly long time of getting to know one another and knowing the practice and exchanging treatments and so on, that this is what they're doing, then I ask them to pay up to the level that all the other students have made their financial commitment as a student. And I think this is part of, and I know that this is part of the teaching. So this is, again, the part where lineage and teaching come together. This is a part of my teaching. This is how the system works. And it works in conjunction with all the different levels of how we use money in our life and all the different levels of resistance about money that we have in our life and all the gifts that money brings to us in our lives. So it's part of the teaching of Reiki for me. For other practices, another lineage, they may actually give Reiki away, like to ask no money, because they feel like as a spiritual practice, this shouldn't have anything to do with money. Well, it's a different belief system, and it serves them and it serves their students in a way that mine can't do. And so lineage and practice come together in this particular instance. So it has nothing to do with the rightness or wrongness or whatever of lineage. It has to do with the teaching that the lineage represents. What was the second question about? It was really a hard one.
Yeah. It was, is there any spiritual reality or depth to anyone's lineage apart from the spiritual maturity of the individual?
Well, this one I would love to have and talk to several of my dear friends about, but I give you what I can right now, and that is that from my experience of being a lineage bearer and being the fourth one in a line, I believe that I receive wisdom from the people who came before me. And that some of that wisdom has been passed down through story. Some of that wisdom is passed down through what I would call an innate understanding of this practice that I carry. And maybe that's somehow messages whispered in my ear on a spiritual level. I don't know. But I feel like through the years, all these years that I practiced Reiki from 1979 till now, the Reiki community itself has accumulated wisdom because of our accumulated time in practicing Reiki and just being human and being able to be more honest with each other. So I think it's a combination of the two. And I don't know very many lineages except for mine. There is a question that's coming up about lineage. And lineage is something that goes from one master to another, and the practice is passed from one master to another. And this provides a kind of successive process where not only does the lineage bearer change in some way and represents a time-space reality for that practice, but that the practice also is developing and has each stage. And so I see that, for instance, Mikao Usui was inspiration. And he gave us this inspiration and some form, but it was, in my lineage, it was Chijiro Hayashi, who, because of his clinical background, really gave the practice that I have a real form. And it's a form that could be a dogma instantly, but it's not because of the nature of Reiki itself as an energy. And then my grandmother, Hawayo Chikata, took this form and practiced it and showed its value in the real world. I mean, she grounded this. And now this practice, after being proven, has spread around the world in all these different forms. So it's a very interesting process. And it's very difficult to say, but this is sort of where I come from. So that influences my response a lot. Did I actually answer the question?
I think you did. And I am interested to hear what people who you would consult with would have to say as well. And yeah, I don't have a response to the question, but one thought is that, how is it worded? Is there any spiritual reality? And my understanding of reality is that when we believe something is real, it is real. And when a group of people collectively believe something is real, there's a collective agreement that this is an actual reality thing. So it's sort of like, I think there's a degree of social construction to reality. And our next question came from Sharon, who said,
no, you can't stop there. Okay, so be sure to write this one down because we really need to revisit it.
Yeah,
Great.
I'll highlight it and make sure that we look at it again. So Sharon wrote, I have not yet, oh, excuse me for a moment while I adjust the size so I can see all of the text. She said, I have not yet undertaken a master class. I have thus far received my Reiki training from 2 different masters at different times. We all began our training in the same lineage. In fact, the master I am currently studying with originally trained under my first master too. I am considering beginning my master level classes and though I resonate more closely with my current teachers, return to an even pure, simple style of Reiki.
Is there a question in there?
No.
Okay, good. Follow yourself. That's important.
Okay. Should I move on to the next question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Irina wrote, it happened so that my teaching lineage and initiation lineage are different. I studied a lot from one master, but was initiated by another with whom I continue my study. I try to honor them both, but in terms of lineage, it is somehow confusing. Can you help me?
Right. So I don't understand the differences. So I can't really address this maybe accurately. But again, I go back to if you were initiated by someone, but you don't retain any of their practice, then that initiation becomes a part of your richness of your Reiki life. But I would I hope that one of the masters that you were initiated by, you also use their practice. So maybe this helps you in your being clear about this with your students and with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a couple of things. There is the past webinar we did on reconciliation along the path of mastery, and one of the themes that I experienced in that conversation was reconciliation within ourselves and our own practice. Yes. So Irina, that may be valuable for you. I also believe, Irina, you were with us for the online intensive we did on integrity of second degree. And I believe you have the recordings of that. And there was some conversation about this. But what I remember Phyllis saying was for you to be able to hold all of it and not have it be in conflict, that you've received these teachings from one person and you've received initiation from another person, and that it's all part of the practice, and you can hold that and also authentically walk with your practice, which includes honoring all of the teaching that you've had the privilege of receiving along your path. And Phyllis, because we started about 10 minutes late, I'm going to keep going, if that's all right with you, for another 10 minutes.
Sure. Okay. I just see that on the chat. Irina has written, but what about lineage? I don't know what about lineage. I don't understand, Irina.
So Irina, you would have your lineage of initiation would go with the master who actually initiated or attuned you.
Yes. And there are many people who actually retain the teaching of the first and second degree master, having been initiated by another master, simply because the master who initiated in first and second degree either isn't initiating masters or won't initiate you as a master, or maybe you were in a situation where you wanted to be a master and you didn't understand that you could find a master who had the same practice as your first and second degree master. So there are all these different places of what ifs, and I agree with Rachel that this process of reconciliation within us as Reiki masters is really important, and that this is an individual thing that you work out. There's no right way to do this.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge all of the great comments and questions that are coming in on the chat, those of you who are with us live. And the last time I remember having this many questions in advance and on the chat was the webinar we did on Reiki and money. And we ended up doing a second one, just the two of us, where Phyllis answered all the questions unanswered. So perhaps we find a time to do that. Phyllis, I'm wondering if there's a question that came in advance that you'd really like to respond to in the time that we have left right now.
Okay, I'm just going to go to this document.
Yeah.
I see that we've done most of them. I think let's start with Pauline's questions about the lineage bearer. Okay. And I think the first couple I could answer in the time we have left.
Okay.
Or maybe all of them. We'll see.
Okay. So Pauline wrote, the questions that come to mind, is there a certain way the energy goes from one lineage bearer to another when the next lineage bearer takes over the task of the previous one? Usui initiated 21 masters. In theory, that could be the start of 20 lineages. Question mark. And some of them will again have initiated many masters. So there are many branches of lineage coming from Mikao Usui? Question mark. For example, you have the Gakkai with a president. How do you see this? I feel every lineage bearer brought a new valuable step to the practice and spread of Reiki, of which I am very grateful. Phyllis, how do you see the role of each lineage bearer?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in my experience, the energy of the practice, not of Reiki, but of the practice, like I feel like the practice that I have as a lineage bearer has its own energy field. It's like we all as individuals have our own energy field, and so do all of our practices. And I believe that as a lineage bearer, in the person who's going to come after me, that there will be a person that arises now out of the hundreds, thousands of people who practice this practice, and I will recognize the energy going to them. That it hasn't happened yet has been kind of reassuring for me, because I feel like I'm going to live for a while longer, because otherwise I would recognize that. Yay. Also, that energy is not recognized only by me, that energy passing, but recognized by other masters of the system and by students of that system. So I'm here totally out of recognition. If everybody decided I wasn't the lineage bearer of this practice, then I wouldn't be. I would be a Reiki master, and I would still carry on and teach classes and so on. So it's very interesting to just remember that lineage bearing comes from a practice that recognizes that the practice itself has life, is a living entity, and that there's a person who carries that living entity from generation to generation. I don't know if Usui initiated 21 masters. I have to take your word for it. And in theory, that could be the start of 20 lineages. I'm not quite sure why that's not 21 lineages. Yes, that's true for me. And Chujiro Hayashi was a master who was recognized, I understand, by Mikao Usui. He wasn't the only one. I just want you to be clear that I don't have any claim about Shujiro Hayashi being his Usui's successor. He was a master, and he took Reiki and added his clinical mind to it and practice, and allowed Reiki to become developmental. So the Gakkai, and the really important piece of the Gakkai, is that they practice as close as possible to the way Mikao Usui practiced. That's really different than our practice. In our practice, there were developmental stages that happened. So our source and our inspiration, and I don't know how much of our practice is from Mikao Usui, but it has developmentally changed through the years to become the practice that I hold. In the Gakkai, they really see that Mikao Usui had a certain way of practicing. And it's my understanding, though I've never spoken to them directly, and but from hearsay that comes out, that they are afraid that this practice is going to kind of melt away, because the limitation of their membership is really strict, like it used to be, I believe. A family member, and one that was recommended as being a member of the Gakkai, and then people would vote them in, because they wanted to keep it with people who were really, really committed. And I totally would love that there would be these wonderful people who were really, really committed to this practice. They've opened, I understand, the practice to some non-Japanese people. I think this is an interesting development. I don't understand the thought behind it, but I'm really sad about it, because I do believe that there is an essence of Mikao Usui's practice that only a Japanese person living in Japan with Japanese as a first language can really understand. And that core of our source is something that we all draw on. We don't understand it. We aren't conscious of it, but I do believe that it really makes a difference. And I would rather support it being there. And this paradox, I see that, the families, that the original families are not producing people who are dedicated Reiki practitioners. So they have to go to other families. And how do they do that? How do they make a criteria? I don't have an answer for that. So I see that they're going with the best that they can do, and wanting Gakkai to really exist in another in several more generations. And I really would like that too, because they hold a place for me as a Reiki student that doesn't appear in my own lineage and practice. And I believe that they hold something for all of us that's really important for our practice of Reiki. And I have seen, and I've talked a little bit about my lineage, in the sense, not my owning it, but the lineage that I hold, that Usui was the inspiration, and Chujiro Hayashi created our form, and Hawayo Chikata practiced it. This is incredibly simplistic. And in my time, this was spread around the world to many different cultures. And we're forming a kind of movement or community that has the possibility to influence, for me, the development of humanity. And where this is going next, I don't know, because I can only see my own generation. So it's going to be really interesting to find out who's next. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. Before we close out, I'll be sure to pull all the questions from the chat so that we have them, and Phyllis and I will be in touch about how how she'll be responding to those.
Yeah. I just have one little thing to say about the next webinar in November. We're going to have a guest with us. I'm really excited about this. And one of my questions for myself was, would this particular webinar set the stage or create a foundation for our guest, who is Yakuten Inamoto, who's a master who is Japanese and is initiated by a Japanese master who was initiated by Chujiro Hayashi. And he and I have had some really beautiful conversations about Reiki. And I would love to go through some of these questions with him. And what I really wanted to talk about was something like the nature of Reiki energy, and to hear it from a cultural perspective that I don't have inside of me. And I really love these kinds of conversations with him. So I believe that these questions around lineage also could really be interesting in this dynamic. So stay tuned for next time.
Okay. So let's close out with Reiki. If it's in your practice to send distance Reiki, I invite you to send Reiki to our collective highest purpose. And you're also, of course, welcome to send Reiki to yourself and acknowledge your interconnectedness to all of us around the world. And in giving Reiki to yourself, you are also Reikiing our collective highest purpose. Feel free to continue sending Reiki as long as it flows through you and you feel called. And until next time, peace, love, and Reiki.